Hello, folks. My name is Alan, and it's that time again. Let's talk metal. Although tonight is kind of questionable whether we're talking about metal because we're going to talk about that weird corner of metal that some people aren't very comfortable talking about. We're going to talk about a little bit of glam metal or hair metal if you prefer. I'm going to use the two interchangeably tonight. I'm not going to try to dig deep into the semantics. So, yeah, this is one of those odd corners of the heavy metal universe. And, for a lot of headbangers, it's the part that you don't want to talk about because, your true metal street cred is in danger if you discuss this too much. I mean, let's be honest, you're going through your, band resume and your collection stuff, you want to talk about, Bolt Thrower, the unrelenting death metal machine churning you into the ground. Or you want to talk about, the, true satanic thrash attack of Slayer. Or, the, cold, cutting, brutal, evil, pounding cold of dissection. Or the, catchy, friendly, poppy sounds of Fire House. Wait, okay. Yeah, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things is lame. Except it's not that lame, depending on if you're willing to be honest with yourself and how old you are. For older headbangers, if you grew up, or if you were born rather in like the late 60s and early 70s, you started getting into heavier music, in the late 70s, early 80s, and some of that were hair bands. You may have cut your teeth on things like Quiet Riot and Twisted Sister. If you were born more like in the mid 70s, like myself, you were a little too young for, We're Not Going to Take It and those anthems, but you were kind of hitting your formative teenage years right when Def Leppard and Guns N' Roses and those kind of bands were taking over the world. So you may not have been a biggest fan of them, but they were definitely bands you were aware of. They were part of the background music of growing up, and as such, you know about them. And if we're honest with ourselves, there's usually something that we like. Again, the conversation often goes like, oh, hair bands, those are terrible, absolutely. Well, except so-and-so, because, actually some of their albums were pretty good. And 45 minutes later, you're still talking about, 3 or 4 other bands that were like, well, yeah, that one wasn't so bad either. Yeah, those guys had some really cool albums, once upon a time. They may have gotten lame later, but I like the first 2 albums. And so it goes. And I'm no different. The first things, I really, got interested in as heavier music were things that fall into this kind of glammy hair category. The first thing I ever went out and bought that was heavier than Billy Joel or Huey Lewis was the single for Great White's Once Bitten, Twice Shy. Now, I bought this as a cassette single, which I no longer have, but I replaced it with a CD single later on. This was, I believe, probably summer 89, possibly just a little earlier than that. But yeah, this is one of the first heavier songs. It was on the radio a lot, on MTV a lot, and that clicked with me. And so, okay, that's not bad. Folks who know me know that one of the other first full albums I bought of something a little heavier was this one, which apparently I'm genetically incapable of not waving around every couple of videos. But again, got enough airplay on MTV that I kind of latched on to the first hit single from it, Naughty Naughty, and picked it up. Within a few months of that, I was, getting And Justice for All and Years of Decay and, accelerating into heavier stuff. But a lot of these glam bands, they were the background music I had been growing up with, even if I didn't buy them all as soon as they came out. Things like Def Leppard's Hysteria and Appetite for Destruction. Yeah, all through intermediate school and into high school, those were the bands that everybody listened to if you were listening to anything remotely heavy. So tonight, I thought I'd talk about a few of the more relatively obscure ones that I liked and still do, but that never quite got the big break. Maybe they made it onto a big label, but the album, kind of flopped, or they got on the scene just a little bit too late. The market was already oversaturated. The music industry was already changing into other directions, grunge, stuff like that, so that, they never quite caught their break. So again, if this video is not for you, that's okay. Although you clicked it, and you've watched about 5 minutes of it so far, so again, you can't hate it that much, or you wouldn't still be here. So, before you go leaving mean comments about my Firehouse CD, just remember, you're watching it of your own free will. This is my Citrus CD, by the way. It's not mine, I swear. I go for the actual vinyl when they were still called White Heat and putting out 7-inch singles, because that's how I roll when I'm listening to Firehouse. This is actually an early version of Helpless. They had that song in their repertoire long before they changed their name. Yeah, my true metal street cred is totally shot after this night, but you know what? I'm secure enough in my masculinity to deal with that. Okay, enough goofing off. Let's talk about some bands. First one I want to mention is a band that I've always really liked. I first heard them on the soundtrack to Wes Craven's Shocker, which was a bad ripoff of Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street. It's always bad when you're ripping off your own movies within just a year or two of them coming out. But the band is from Germany, and they're called Bonfire. Bonfire had a long history going back into the early 70s. So this was sort of a group of older guys from overseas. I think the band's name is Kakaman, and I may be horribly mispronouncing it. But they'd been around since the early 70s. Had become sort of popular in Germany, had put out an album. But as they got into the mid-80s, they changed their name to Bonfire and kind of set out to become a big name more on the kind of straddling that line between the hair metal scene and what you think of as maybe like the arena rock style. They got their first album out as Bonfire in 1986. It's this one called Don't Touch the Light. Weird cover concept there. I don't know. Maybe it has some great symbolic significance in Germany. Beats me. A lot of people described Bonfire over the years as a Scorpions clone. And to be honest, I always thought that was kind of lazy, that it was just like, oh, they're from Germany, and they're playing the music that would probably appeal to like big rock stadium audience crowd. So, let's just compare them to that. Frankly, Bonfire, they don't have the same, really great guitar work that Scorpions did, but their big secret weapon was their vocalist. And I got to double check a few things here. I can't remember everything. Lessman, I believe is his name. Klaus Lessman. That sounds right. I've got it over here off to the side. Yeah, Klaus Lessman. Lessman was their secret weapon. He was their vocalist, and he has a very smooth voice, and it's a very American-sounding voice. When I first heard these guys for a while, it never occurred to me they were not an American band. But yeah, somehow they got included on Wes Craven's soundtrack, and that movie had a pretty heavy metal soundtrack, which I picked up on and loved a lot of the hacks on it. And so I tracked down albums by a lot of them, including Bonfire. So yeah, it is going for the same general overall sound as something like 80s era Scorpions, but it's approaching it a little different way. Really strong vocal performance. There's no trace of a German accent on here. Klaus Mean's voice in Scorpions, I love them. I love his voice, but it is, sort of an acquired taste. It's got that, little bit of a Germanic inflection to it. Lessman doesn't have that at all. So they put out several albums. Don't Touch the Light is not bad. It has some good songs on it. It's a little bit short as a debut album. Their sophomore effort was called Fireworks, and it has two different versions. This is what it looked like if you bought it in most places in the world. But if you bought it in America, where it was released through RCA, I believe, it just kind of has like, generic band pictures on the cover, which, not as cool looking. Really, did albums ever sell better when you put this kind of thing on the cover? Kind of doubting it. But regardless, it's a very strong album if you like this style of music. Really good songs throughout on it. Big anthemic songs meant to be sung along to. It's got, enough of a rocking metal sound to it that it's quite passable for the music of that day and age. They got their third album out, and this one, I have to double check the date on album number three. Uh, Album number three comes out in 1989 and was called Point Blank. Um, and this one was extremely good. I loved this album to death back in the day. It took me a while to get it because it was never released in the US. RCA had made a push for the band with Fireworks. They didn't quite get over, and as such, Point Blank never got a US release to my knowledge. So it wasn't until a few years later that I even learned that this album had come out. Yay, living in the late 80s and early 90s when information was not readily available at your fingertips on your phone and, laser beams shooting it straight into your brain 24 hours a day. Yeah, I didn't find out about this album, I think, until maybe late 92, early 93, and had to get the local record store to do a special order and get it for me as an import CD. Right there we go. Which, if you had to order CDs back then, you know that I had to pay a lot of money to get this. But it was so worth it. Blew me away. Loved it to death. Within just a couple of days of playing it, I went back to the same record store and had them order me their fourth album, which had also come out in the interim. The fourth one was called, the fact that I can't remember the title is kind of a spoiler alert for where this is going. The fourth one is called Knockout. It came out in 91. And they really started to lose the plot on that one. It was the last one with Lessman on vocals, as I recall. But the songs just weren't coming together then. I think the album revolved around, a cover of, that, was it The Strokes, Stroke Me, that horrible song that just nobody should play, much less cover. So yeah, it's really the first three Bonfire albums that are the ones to check out. The band has been around. They've taken some hiatuses, come back, released other albums. I'm not familiar with the later stuff. Lessman left the band, and they ran into a lot of contractual problems for a long time. But you can still find some of their stuff. There's a nice collection of a couple of the albums available as a CD reissue and stuff too. So yeah, if an Americanized version of Scorpions, with again sort of a big stadium rock sound appeals to you, this is a band that's worth checking out for sure. All right, next band that I want to give a little love to is this group, House of Lords. House of Lords is a band that had a shot at doing something pretty big. They were founded by, and I want to butcher the name, Greg Giruffola. He was the keyboard player in the 70s band Angel, which, had been a thing. He had a lot of connections in the music industry. He had worked with Gene Simmons and such. And, so when he got his new band up and going, it turned into House of Lords, there was a reasonable amount of hype about it. He ended up releasing his first album with House of Lords in '88. This is not the first album. I actually don't have the first one. It's one of the few I don't have. It produced a couple of minor hits for them. It's a very keyboard-driven album. No surprise, since it was kind of Greg's brainchild, and that's his instrument, so it made sense. But it did have a couple of hits. It got the band a little bit of a following. And once again, while they were kind of lumped in with the hair and glam metal crowd, they're a little bit more in that sort of 80s hard rock, leaning a little bit AOR. They have the look of a glam band, but not really the sound. This is not a Poison or a Def Leppard or an LA Guns kind of sound to it at all. It's a little more of what I guess you'd call a mature sound. They kept putting out albums, and I've got most of them on one format or another. The second album, Sahara, had a minor hit that got some rotation on MTV for a while. That's how I found out about the band. This band's secret weapon wasn't Greg on keyboards, but it was, I believe his name's James Christensen, the vocalist. He's got kind of a deep but warm voice, got just a little bit of gravel to it to give it some texture. And they just do a really good job with songwriting. So they released Sahara, and then around 92, they released their third album, Demons Down. And this is a really good album for this style. It's easily my favorite of the first three. The problem, of course, was by the time this came out, the winds had changed and this style of music was really on its way out. I mean, for kids that were eating up Nirvana and Pearl Jam, seeing a band look like this on the back cover, that's so 5 years ago. That's just, they're not going to buy that. And it's a real shame because it is a very strong album. But it was also the last one the band would make for quite a while because, yeah, the music industry went in a completely different direction. The band did come back together around 2004, 2005, without Greg involved. I think he was involved at first, but didn't stick around by the time they were releasing albums again. Their first comeback album was pretty mediocre. I think it was called Power and the Glory, and I picked it up long after the fact. It wasn't bad, but there was nothing special about it. But the album after that, they really started to hit their stride. Everything started to come together. It was this one, World Upside Down. And this was released, I believe, on with Locomotive and Frontiers Records. If you're a fan of this kind of, hard rock leaning AOR style of music, you'll know Frontiers. And House of Lords is really emblematic of that kind of stuff. And it really clicks well here. The band is in really good form, and they start just consistently putting out very strong albums from there forward. Come to My Kingdom has a lot of great material on it. Cartesian Dreams is another one that's, just really solid output. And that's the way to describe them. They're just very consistent, very solid. None of the albums are groundbreaking. None of them go off in a completely weird direction. None of them are going to score, 5 skulls on, Banger TV or anything. But if you like this style, it's a band you can go back to and always be happy. And I always do. The next several albums I've just gotten on digital format. I buy the downloads from eMusic or Bandcamp or whatever. The band is still at it. They've just put out a new album. This one actually got on physical copy because it was on sale when it got released. So the band is still putting out quality stuff even today. They've had lots of lineup changes here and there through the years, but they always put together a pretty strong team. And as long as they've got Christensen on vocals, I'm pretty happy with their overall sound. He does a great job of defining their direction, and yeah, quality stuff if you like that style. All right, up next is one of my favorite hair bands that never got a break. Well, they guess they got a small break, but you know what I mean. They never quite got there. It's a band called Babylon AD. They did get onto a big label. They were with Arista Records. Like some of the other groups I'm mentioning here, their sound is not pure Poison or Warrant worship. With Babylon AD, there's a little bit more of an emphasis on a bluesy kind of sound. It's not blues music whatsoever. But yeah, the songs just have, a little bit different structure to them. And a lot of this is emphasized in the vocals of Derek Davis, who has an amazing voice for this style. A lot of his other projects have been kind of blues or heavy. So, that was a big part of his background. His voice is very good for this. It's got kind of it's hard to describe. It's got a very sultry, kind of soulful sound to it. He has a very interesting way of enunciating his words that gives him a lot of emphasis, really makes them smolder when he wants to go kind of slow, or again, just kind of get, this, definitely sort of sex appeal vibe is present there. If I'd been, a 15-year-old girl when this came out, I know whose picture I would have cut out of the magazines and put on my wall. Perhaps I've shared a little too much there. I wonder if I can figure out how to edit this. Whatever. Let's just move on. Anyway, really good album here. And again, the songs are put together in a very strong way. The guitars, none of these bands necessarily are going to be, really considered flashy by true heavy metal standards, but they do a nice job of accentuating this kind of, and again, it's not a sleazy sound. It's not a glammy sleaze at all to it, but it's more of this just kind of, smoldering, kind of, sultry, sexy vibe that they're cultivating on some of the music. And it works really well on this album. Where the band had, a little bit of a push, the song "The Kid Goes Wild" was featured, if I remember right, it's RoboCop 2 soundtrack, and the video actually features RoboCop in the video, trying to arrest the band, for violation of something or other. Kind of presages the Guns N' Roses video that came out a couple years later when they were featured on the Terminator 2 soundtrack. So yeah, Axel, we know where you stole that from. Can't fool us. Babylon AD did it first. They also have Sam Kinison makes a guest appearance doing the vocals, doing a little voiceover in the bridge of Kid Goes Wild. It's a song about, kid, shotgun, bad news around town, chased down by cops. And so you get Sam Kinison, the voice of the kid screaming in the middle, you'll never take me, you effing cops. Sounding like Sam Kinison. But that aside, it's a really strong album, especially the A side. Always been really impressed with. This is one of those albums I'll still go back and play every now and then and still just be really wowed by just how good it was. They had a sophomore album come out in early 92 that was similar in style, and it wasn't bad. It was one of those albums where about half the songs were pretty good and the other half kind of missed the mark just a little bit. And once again, by that time frame, the music industry was rapidly moving away from this. The band has, put out other albums. I have not kept up with them over time. I don't know who's been in and out of the band and, what the quality or if they went in different directions. But yeah, the first album there in particular was a really strong one. The second one, if you really like the band, it's worth checking out for the good songs. I don't have a copy of the second album anymore. It always has a weird emotional attachment for me because I picked it up literally, I think it was the day of my grandfather's funeral, that we had done all the funeral stuff in the morning. And you had this, huge mob of family at my grandmother's place in the afternoon. And I think my mom just kind of wanted to get me and my sister kind of out of it for a little while, let us go do something else. So we drove over, to the next little town over to the local mall, and they amazingly had a copy of it in the little record store there. So, yeah, I picked it up to have, something else to listen to since it was kind of obviously a bit of a bummer time. So anyway, that's Babylon AD. All right, let's cover two more of these before we call it a night. This is a name that some people will know because he did have one big hit single in 1982 with a song called Fantasy. It's become kind of one of the minor 80s hits. It doesn't get a lot of love on the retro 80s stuff anymore. But talking about Aldo Nova, this guy right here. So Aldo Nova's from Canada. And yeah, he had this early success with the song Fantasy. I think it got to around number 23 on the top hit singles. So big deal. Didn't really follow it up with another mega hit. Did a few more albums, in the mid 80s. Didn't really get a lot of traction. Had record label issues where he wanted out of his contract. Record label wouldn't let him, so he kind of just parked himself in Canada and waited for the contract to expire. And when it finally did, he reemerged with this album around 91 called Blood on the Bricks. In the interim, he had done a little bit of writing for Bon Jovi and a sort of a collaboration. This ended up getting released on Jamco, which is obviously Bon Jovi's connected label. And I believe Bon Jovi actually has a production credit on this album, which is saying something because it's a very good sounding album production wise. And again, if you like this kind of, it looks like it's going to be kind of, very glammy, but it leans more, a little more towards, the hard rock side of things. And the song list on this is just fantastic. I love this album to death. Even today, I can sit and play this and sing along to every song. And screw you if you don't like it. It's just fabulous. A lot of good memories, happy, high school memories, just goofing off with friends with this thing on in the background. This was one of those little gems that me and my friends discovered when it came out, and we just played it to death over time. I don't think oops, sorry about that. Don't think Aldo Nova ever really did another album in that kind of hard rock style, but he's had a very long career in music, mainly as a producer and songwriter. He's actually done a lot of work with Celine Dion, and I think he's nominated and maybe won a Grammy for either one of the productions or songs that he wrote for her. So he's had a very long and very solid, career in the music industry. It wasn't just a fly by night thing. So even though he didn't become the next Def Leppard or anything like that, he did quite well for himself. So kind of a feel good story. And let's face it, a lot of these bands don't have those. So good for you, Aldo Nova. Yay, Canada. All right, one last one. This is a band that came and went pretty quickly, but they made one really good album. It's a band, I think they were out of Hollywood. They're called Hardline. They got this album, Double Eclipse, came out in 1992. And again, by 92, bands that were putting out this kind of material in 92, it's because they'd already started it in 91 before Nevermind and 10 broke out really big, and all the record labels were looking for other things to do. But as a pair of brothers were kind of the core of the band. And once again, while it's kind of looking a bit dated by that time, it's not a Poison clone. It's much stronger than that kind of material, leaning towards the better side of glam and hair and getting into the hard rock sounds. This had just a little bit of MTV play, just a little bit, but it was enough for me to hear the song. Let's take a look here. Which one had the video? I believe it was the song Taking Me Down. I might be wrong about that. It's been a while. But I think Taking Me Down had a video that got a little bit of MTV play, and it was enough to catch my interest and be like, hey, that actually sounds pretty good. And by 92, some of these hair metal bands were not sounding so good, and I was not paying as much attention to them. I was, much more into heavier stuff by then. So it took a bit to get my attention from a band that looked like this by 92, but this one I did, and picked up the album and have always liked it. This was has a connection for me. This was lawn mowing music that I did a lot of mowing yards as a teenager to make money. Thing about real heavy metal music is it's really hard to listen to through earphones on a Walkman when you're pushing a lawn boy and you got this big motor going right in front of you, because the music just kind of blends in with the engine and you can't hear much even when you've got it cranked up. That was one thing about a lot of sort of hair glam bands. They didn't blend in with the lawnmower, and so this was the kind of stuff I would always play on the days when I was out mowing yards, because you could actually hear it. And Hardline was one of my go-tos. Anytime I had to mow a yard, this was probably going to be one of the piles of tapes, that I would throw in, and help kill 45 minutes while you're pushing a lawnmower back and forth in 90% humidity and 90-degree temperatures. Yay, growing up in the rural South. Fun times. But listening to Hardline made it a little better. Again, the band disintegrated pretty quickly, I think. They came back together. I know nothing about the reunion projects, if they did new original music or not. But again, it's one of these sort of like overlooked minor classics of that style. So that's all I've got for tonight. If you're still with me, thanks for hanging in there. What are some of your favorites that, not the obvious ones, forget about, the Rats and, the Quiet Riots and, that kind of stuff for a while. And yes, we all like early Motley Crue. We get that. But what are the unknown bands that, don't really, have that, true metal street cred, but they had those kind of metal trappings about them? They would have been considered glamour hair bands that you really liked. Admit it. There's one or two that you like. Here's the time to do it. Leave a, message in the comments down below. Feel free to change your name or post under your sister's account or something like that if you're worried that, some of your friends are going to see it. But there are some out there. What are some that I didn't mention that you think are really good? If you're familiar with any of these, what were your favorite albums? Or did you think some of these were particularly bad that you never did get into them? Let me know what you think down below. So that's enough on this little corner of the heavy metal universe. Next time we'll get back to something. We'll talk about, corpse ripping thrash metal or something that'll, South American Black and Death thrash, the NWN catalog. I'll start earning those true metal street cred points back, I promise. But until then, everybody take care, stay safe, and keep doing up your hair in perm while you bang your head.